All right, let's talk collar and collar stand and the attachment of them. Now, once I learned this way to attach the collar and collar stand, I haven't used the traditional method that most patterns will tell you to do, which is you're going to construct all of this off of the shirt, and then you're going to put it on the shirt. But I find to get really nice finished edges along the top of your collar stand, so that round part that goes up into the collar stand, uh, it works way better if you construct the collar and collar stand onto the shirt. So the first thing you'll need to be able to do is you've got to know where the collar is going to end up on your shirt, the placement of the collar. So as you can see here, I've marked where that collar is, here and here. Ignore that line. But I've marked it there, and then I basically marked my seam allowance here. Now this is just a guide right now, because sometimes due to just how you cut it or the pattern itself will end up being a little extra, you might have to come in a little closer to get a really nice clean edge. So once we get it attached to the shirt, I can show you how to mark that out. So see me in a few seconds. All right, so I've now clipped my collar stand into place, matching up my notches along the back of the collar stand. I've clipped it into place. You can pin it into place, of course. Clips are just easier and faster for me. So I've sandwiched the shirt in between the two pieces of the collar stand. Now, for the next step, go ahead and meet me at the sewing machine. Now, this next part of the process, I do this. I wasn't taught this, but I find it makes the whole attaching easier. So what I do is on each edge of the collar stand, I feel for the edge of the placket on each side, and I go ahead and stitch my seam allowance, just stitching the placket down. Because what we're going to do in this process is we have to roll this shirt out of the way while we stitch this curve in seam allowance. So I find instead of trying to make sure the clips or the pins hold all this up here in place, it works really well if you just stitch down the placket. So I'm going to do that on both sides and then take you to the next step. All right, I've got the placket part of my shirt stitched down into place. And then what I do is I'll set it flat on the table, and I'll take my ruler and I'll just kind of run it along the placket and find out, kind of feel that for that edge, and make sure that my corner here is meeting at the very top, at the very edge of that placket. And on this side, as you can see from my original seam allowance markings, it landed right on the money. On this side, however, as you can see, I marked out where my placket was running there, along here. If I stitch that all together and then put it on the shirt, I would end up with just a slight overhang over the placket. So that would this little part would hang over the placket sticking out. And, for like really professional, like store-bought, quote-unquote store-bought shirts, right, it's really straight. It goes right along that placket. It's a really sharp line. So that's why I do it this way, so I can get that sharp, clean edge that you see in store-bought clothes, if you will. I feel it just gives it more of a better finished look and less of a handmade look. If you like that, that's fine. I just find that this is really smooth. So now what I'll do is I'll adjust this curve to meet that point. So when I do the next process, it stitches right next to the top of that placket, and I get a really clean, straight, as close to a straight transition as I can. Okay, the next step is to roll your shirt up out of the way, all the way behind where your collar is going to end. And again, this is my collar line. This was a mistake. By the way, this is not pen I'm using. This is actually heat erasing ink. I get the pens from Waywack. Yeah, so this would actually disappear if I took an iron to it. But anyway, I rolled the shirt up all out of the way. So if I felt in here, you can kind of see it, right? The shirt's tucked away right here. And I'm going to start my sewing just a couple stitches. I like to go a couple stitches, 1 or 2 stitches past where the collar's going to hit. It helps with a clean attachment. When I attach the collar, it kind of keeps it really clean. And then I'm going to stitch around my seam allowance all the way to the other side. When I get to the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to roll up the shirt behind this where the collar hits and where you're going to finish the stitch, because you don't want to stitch your shirt into this. All right, so I've stitched around my edge here, my corner. I started, as you can see, just a couple stitches behind where that collar is going to end up sitting. And I made it to the base of the collar stand here. I've unclipped this, and I'll kind of unroll this a little bit here. That way it doesn't get caught in this next part here. So just stitch along your seam allowance along the base of the collar, moving the fabric as you go, making sure you don't get any kind of picks or anything along the collar stand. And then I'll pick up when I get to the other side. Hey there, welcome to the other side of the collar stand. So I've stopped sewing right where my marking hits. I've got it placed where it hits the edge of the placket. So before I go around that corner, again, you don't want to stitch this part into the shirt here. So we're going to roll it up and we're going to clip it out of the way. And then we're going to go, again, just a stitch or two past the collar, where the collar is going to sit, the end of the collar. One thing to mention is if, you know, I've heard like if you lengthen your stitches, it's a little easier to get around this line. So what I do is the first pass is I'll lengthen my stitch, go around the curve, kind of giving me a guide, and then I shorten it back up to a normal stitch length, and I go back around the corner, just because I like to reinforce that part of the collar stand, because when you're turning it out, you're, you know, putting a lot of pressure on it, and it just keeps everything nice and stitched together. So basically I do a full back stitch. All right, we've got everything attached here. We've got the collar stand attached to the shirt now. So now what we do is, let me see if I can flip the shirt around here so you can see the markings. So where we marked this collar, where the collar is going to sit, so the edge of the collar is going to end up sitting right there, right? What we need to do is the brave part here, right? We are going to do a kind of backwards angle and clip the collar stand right just behind the stitch, just behind the last stitch here. So we're just going to cut a slash straight to that. Careful not to cut your seam, and also your shirt. So keep your shirt, the rest of your shirt out of the way. I like to hold it here. So what I'm going to do is clip right to that line. So now you can see that's clipped. Do it on the other side here. Get the shirt out of the way. Again, clip right to that line. Sorry, it's not focused, just behind that last stitch. Now we're going to trim our seam allowance all the way around, down to, you know, just trim it down. Okay, so I've trimmed my seam allowance and put some, you know, clips here along the edges, so when it folds in, the fabric has somewhere to go, just like you would any other curve. Now, you take this and you turn it right side out. And when you do that, I use a little, you know, corner tool here, and I smooth out this edge to get me a nice round edge to get that seam that seam that I've made nice and smooth here. Push out the corner a little bit. So as you can see, now I don't have that overhang that you'll sometimes get. You'll get like a little overhang. Now if you do end up having an overhang, you can turn it wrong side out again, and then just go back and restitch your line and get it as close as you want it. So I'm pretty happy with the results here, so I don't need to do that. So now what we'll do is we'll attach the collar stand. So this is the right side of my shirt. On the right side, I'm going to, let me see, okay. I'm going to attach my collar and clip it to just, actually before I do that, we're going to go press the shirt. And then I'll come back and show you what to do with the collar. So something that when you press will also let you do is you can, when you're pressing it, you can see along the edge to make sure you don't have any pick marks or, you know, little folds that you didn't bunch up the fabric anywhere and it's nice and smooth. If that happens, then again, you just turn it back, you rip your seam where you need to, and then you kind of, you know, make sure you re-stitch that seam and make sure you didn't catch anything and re-stitch it. You know, it's probably easier you do that before you cut down your seam allowance, to be honest. It just gives you more fabric to pull, you know, to stitch around, just making that part easier. I'm just used to this process and am pretty confident of not catching any extra fabric in there. And I go slow enough during that part to make sure that I don't have that issue. So now that we're pressed, we're going to attach the collar stand. So this is my right side of my shirt. This is how the collar is going to end up laying on the shirt when it's on. And we're going to attach the collar much like they do in the typical manner. But you're going to attach it to the bottom of the collar stand here. We're just going to place it where we snipped it at, right? So right there is where we're going to place it. And then we're going to stitch our seam allowance on just one side of the collar stand, making sure you don't catch the other side of the collar stand. So now that your collar is attached to one side of the collar stand, you're going to trim your seam allowance to take away some of the bulk. We're going to iron it and press so you get a nice straight seam here. And then I'll meet you on the next step. All right, the next and close to the final step is we are going to fold in your seam allowance and press it, right? Take it to take it to your iron and press that seam allowance in. Here I've just marked it with my heat erasing ink. I get that from Wawak. And they're fantastic. It really does work. I can show you here on the inside. If you remember, I marked where all the collar marks were and everything, and that ink is gone. Anyway, test it on a piece of fabric before you use it, as always, like with anything else. But then I don't have to wash the garment after. I've already pre-shrunk this, so I don't have to wash out any chalk or anything like that. Sometimes chalk doesn't always get out either. So anyway, once you get that pressed down, what I like to do then is I like to run a slip stitch along this and making sure I'm going just above that stitch line to cover it up. And then I do a final edge stitch all the way around the collar stand. And then since you slip stitched it, you'll make sure that you catch the shirt on the wrong side. I just got sick. I could put 1,000,000 pins into this shirt and do a stitch in the ditch, and it would never fail. It literally always fell. It would never fail to always fail that I would miss just one slight spot on an edge, or it was a little thicker here and a little thinner here, and it just drove me up the wall. So I found it faster, instead of trying to put all the pins in, is to slip stitch it in place and then take it to the sewing machine. So that's it. That's all you need to do to finish up the collar and collar stand, and that gets you your collar and collar stand in a different way than what most patterns show you. Gives you a nice clean edge, and hopefully that video helped, and happy sewing. Good luck.